History tells us there are really just two kinds of people in this world. There are the ones who are moved around like chess pieces and the ones who actually move them. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're decoding the raw, completely unvarnished mechanics of human nature through the lens of what is arguably one of the most polarizing books ever written, Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. Now listen, we're not going to moralize or sugarcoat anything today. Instead, we are just going to impartially decode exactly how power is engineered, built, and maintained.
But right off the bat, we got to ask a pretty big question. Why do libraries actually debate banning this book? Why does a literal manual on engineering power make comfortable people so deeply uncomfortable? Well, the answer is shockingly simple. It's because it doesn't preach. There are no neat little motivational quotes here, It simply reveals how the world actually operates, right underneath the polite surface of our daily lives. Power isn't just handed to you on a silver platter, it's taken through strategy and human psychology. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the readership of this book is just so incredibly fascinating. Look at this. On one hand, you've got top-tier corporate executives secretly devouring these laws in their corner offices so they can climb the ladder. And on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you have inmates in American prisons studying this text heavily, probably more than almost any other book on earth. Two drastically different demographics, right? But they share the exact same fundamental goal. They are learning the rules of the game to ensure they are never, ever used as pawns by someone else.
So let's just dive right into it. We're going to break down these massive 48 rules into 5 distinct, totally digestible categories of strategy today. 1. The reality of power. 2. Protective intelligence and defense. 3. The master strategist. 4. Controlling the narrative. And finally, number 5, the fluid endgame. All right, starting with Section 1, the reality of power. Let's see how this builds the absolute rock-solid foundation of power management, which is basically handling egos, especially the egos of the people above you. Okay, let's travel way back to 17th century France for a second. Nicholas Fouquet, who was the finance minister, really wanted to impress his boss, King Louis XIV. So he throws the most spectacular party in French history at his personal chateau. I mean, we're talking fireworks, the finest food imaginable, literally thousands of guests. He genuinely thought this magnificent display of his own wealth and taste would win him massive favor. The result? Well, the very next morning, the king had him promptly arrested, and Fouquet spent the rest of his life locked in a prison cell. That is the brutal reality of Law 1, never outshine the master. The absolute second a patron, an investor, or your boss feels insecure or overshadowed by your incredible talent, you're no longer an asset. You immediately become a liability. You got to make them feel brilliant if you want to stay protected. Moving right along to Section 2, Protective Intelligence and Defense. This is where we analyze how power structures rely super heavily on defensive maneuvers and just guarding yourself against the totally unpredictable elements of human nature. Now, when we group these core protective tactics together, this incredible shield of social intelligence starts to form. Whether it's gathering intel through casual chats, making other people rely on you, or avoiding the chronically miserable, which is absolutely crucial, by the way, the ultimate goal is security. But take a close look at Law 16, use strategic withdrawal to create value. Have you ever noticed that if you're constantly available and constantly replying to everyone, you kind of become ordinary? It's true. Strategic absence and social self-protection actually make you invaluable to the people around you.
But, defense isn't always just about withdrawing. Sometimes it's about absolute finality. Law 15 delivers this incredibly brutal, totally impartial observation. Crush your enemy completely. Think about it. When Rome finally defeated their great rival Carthage, they didn't just claim a polite victory and go home. No way. They burned the entire city to the ground, salted the earth, and literally erased Carthage from the map entirely. It is undoubtedly brutal, for sure. But as a purely strategic observation, the lesson is crystal clear. A wounded enemy simply does not forget. Leaving an opponent half defeated out of unearned mercy only guarantees a future threat to your own security.
This brings us to Section 3, the master strategist. This is where we shift gears into the active mindset of a real player in the game, focusing really heavily on managing public perception and deploying highly focused energy.
Consider Law 6 on commanding attention. The stark contrast between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison shows us a pretty harsh reality. Tesla might have been the vastly superior, technically gifted scientist, a true undeniable genius. But here's the thing. Genius alone is completely invisible.
Edison understood that the person who captures the public imagination is the one who wins the ultimate outcome. He absolutely commanded the spotlight, and because of that, Edison became a legend while Tesla really struggled. It's like you can't just be good, you have to be seen being good.
Similarly, when we look at Law 9, the crucial point is understanding how to actually win people over. Just think about your own life for a second. How often has arguing actually genuinely changed someone's mind? Winning through debate basically just exhausts people. It triggers all their egos. But winning through actions, that undeniably dictates reality. Results silence your critics instantly, without you having to speak a single word.
Now we explore Section 4, Controlling the Narrative. Here, we're diving into the slightly darker psychological arts of influence, examining exactly how power is maintained through perception rather than just using blunt force.
Let's define a really fascinating psychological tool here: selective honesty. This is Law 12. Think of this kind of like the legendary Trojan horse. For 10 whole years, the Greeks couldn't breach Troy with force. So what do? They leave a giant wooden horse as an apparent gift. It forced the Trojans to naturally, completely lower their guard. And selective honesty works the exact same way. One incredibly genuine, perfectly timed act of openness can instantly dissolve years of suspicion. When people feel like they've received something real from you, their defensive walls just crumble from the inside out.
And speaking of psychological walls crumbling, Law 27 is perhaps the most chilling observation in the entire source material. It breaks down the architecture of a following. Take Charles Manson, for example. He famously never directly committed the murders his followers carried out. Instead, he replaced logic with an incredibly compelling story. He gave lost people a new identity, a deep sense of belonging, and a unified mission. As humans, we're primarily emotional creatures. We basically just use reason to justify what we already feel anyway. So playing purely on this emotional need to believe in a narrative is an incredibly potent and, obviously, highly dangerous lever of power.
Now, understanding how a following is built naturally leads us to how they are dismantled. Law 42 tells us to strike the shepherd so the sheep will scatter. When J. Edgar Hoover wanted to dismantle Al Capone's massive criminal empire, he didn't waste his time trying to arrest every single street-level gangster running around Chicago. He identified the central node, which was Capone himself, and focused entirely on removing that one guy. Without the center, the entire group was totally directionless, and they easily scattered.
Another really vital aspect of narrative control is the illusion of choice, which we find in Law 31. Give people options, but only the options that you have carefully designed. This is an unbelievably powerful control mechanism because it appeals directly to a person's desire for autonomy. They feel completely in control because, hey, they're making a choice, right? Totally unaware that no matter which option they actually pick, the outcomes have been rigged in your favor from the very beginning. It's a real game changer.
Finally, we reach our last category, Section 5, the fluid endgame. This is the ultimate evolution of the master strategist, having the ability to endlessly adapt to a changing world and, maybe even more importantly, having the absolute discipline to know when to stop.
So the crucial point of this entire endgame is summarized perfectly by this famous Bruce Lee analogy: be like water. Water has no fixed form, right? You pour it into a cup, it becomes the cup. Freeze it, it's a weapon. Release it, and it can literally erode mountains. Rigid commitments make you entirely predictable. And in the game of power, if you're predictable, your moves can be easily anticipated, countered, and totally destroyed. Which leads us directly to the final rule, Law 48, assume formlessness. Because let's face it, the world never ever stops changing just because you've finally decided on a solid plan. Tying yourself down to one single identity or one single unchangeable method basically guarantees your obsolescence. To survive in the long run, you've got to be fluid, highly adaptive, and practically impossible for your opponents to pin down.
But to maintain that survival, you absolutely must heed Law 47, know when to stop. This is a trap that catches even the absolute greatest strategists. Actually, so many leaders throughout history tragically destroy their own legacies, not by failing, but because they lack the discipline to just stop after securing a massive victory. Success inherently makes people a bit reckless and overconfident. True discipline means recognizing the natural conclusion of a victory and knowing exactly when the game is over.
Ultimately, these 48 laws are not a moral system at all. They're essentially an X-ray of human nature. They show us exactly how power functions in our offices, our governments, and our daily relationships. Now, whether you choose to actively use these strategies is completely up to you. But failing to understand these somewhat uncomfortable dynamics simply means losing a game you didn't even know you were playing. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. Take a really close look at the dynamics of your workplace, your social circles, your community. Which of these amoral laws did you instantly recognize operating right now in your own life? Keep observing, don't be a pawn, and thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.